Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cynthia Carney. I am the Director of Delaware State Housing Authority, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the second Affordable Housing Production Task Force meeting. The fact that we have so many fantastic experts in the housing field coming together to talk about this critical need and elevate it here in Delaware is it's really inspiring. It's really awesome, and I appreciate everybody's talent and time today. I want to again thank everyone. Today we're going to hear from Senator Russ Huxtable for an overview of the housing legislation. We will be turning it over to DSHA Chief Strategy Advisor, Caitlin Del Callo, who will share some best practices from other states. And of course, Dave Edgell. Dave from the Director of Office and State Planning Coordination on all things planning, Dave.
Okay.
So I hope today spurred a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity and solutions to some of the issues that we're facing here in Delaware. I want to now pass it over to Caitlin for today's roll call. Caitlin.
Thank you, Director Carney. I'm just gonna go down the list in the order in which I have. So Director Carney,
Here.
Senator Huxtable,
I'm here.
Representative Johnson,
Here.
Senator Hawker is absent. Let us know ahead of time. Representative Pulaski. Representative Pulaski is joining us virtually. In the midst of elevating him to panelist. David Edward,
Here.
Dana Cobb. See her virtually, okay. Sarah Keeper,
Here.
Preston Shell,
Here.
and we have Kevin Spence. Wes from DAR is absent. Deborah Burgos. Mike Ryman,
Here.
okay, Amy Walls,
Here.
Jerry Heisler. Kevin Smith,
Here.
okay, Karen Steedman,
Here,
okay, Courtney Thompson indicated that he would be absent, and Rachel Stucker.
Here.
Okay, so we have 11 of 19 members present. We do have a quorum. And now we are going to approve the draft meeting minutes from the August 29th meeting. I put out a call to all task force members for changes. I only received one change to the spelling of the person's name, which has been updated. Are there any other changes that need to be made to the minutes? Okay. We have a motion to accept the minutes as sent out.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so that was Amy and seconded by Kevin. Great. Let's do the roll call vote on that. So Director Carney.
Here. Agree.
Senator. Woodville?
Yes.
Okay, all right, we'll do Woodville.
All in favor?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, I like it.
You're doing Senate.
Yes.
Meeting lengthy. We can move on to agenda item number 2. Now bring that up for folks online so they can. do that.
I suppose I am agenda item number 2. You are. I am. So thank you all for being here. This is really important work that we're going to be embarking on. We want to kind of touch base on some of the work that we already have done. So when we're discussing in our subcommittee meetings, certain actions that we'd like to take, hopefully the bills that we passed this last session will be a reminder of what we already have done as a starting point, and then we can move forward from there. And I want to talk about one bill from Senate Bill 87, which was in 2023. That one started with the realty transfer tax exemption on affordable housing. projects, especially when they have state and local funding involved in them, to ensure that they are affordable. That was our first bill in really tackling affordable housing. And then we also had a bill from Senator Buxton, Senate Bill 120, which then also allowed the counties to use their realty transfer taxes in for affordable housing. So we're trying to invite other players to the table and remove some of the restrictions for some of the resources that the counties and local jurisdictions receive. Then we had we introduced a large package of bills in 2024, 7 bills altogether. 6 of those got passed. One was dealing with Senate Bill 247, which dealt with manufactured housing regarding the health and safety aspects of the parks and freezing the rents if certain things have not been addressed by those community owners. We established, we codified the home repair fund, which will help in the future for families who are needing emergency and home repairs and modifications, so they can actually age in place. This and another bill, Senate Bill 22, which we'll talk about in a second, are establishing kind of new pots of funds. The General Assembly has been very comfortable in investing into the Housing Development Fund, and I think they need to have their attention be brought to other places, because we seem to have taken that Housing Development Fund pie and made it's kind of relatively stayed the same over a number of years, with the exception of 2023. And we're kind of making smaller slices out of that pie. So if we can kind of take one of those slices and make a new pie, hopefully we'll attract the General Assembly and our fellow members to invest in additional resources for the affordable housing crisis. Senate Bill 245 came to us from the Attorney General's office, and that was regarding mortgage mediation. That's been a very successful program over the last number of years, and we were just expiring the sunset. So it was asked to be sunsetted every 2 years. The General Assembly would extend it, and the Attorney General's office saying, like, this is such a valuable program. Let's remove that sunset provision. Senate Bill 244 follows along the same pathway as Senate Bill 120 did, as far as allowing the counties to use additional revenue that they receive from the accommodations tax. So the state generally tells the jurisdictions what they can spend some of their revenue sources on, and we're just opening up the door for more participation from our local jurisdictions from other sources of revenue that they receive. Now we have 3 more bills. Senate Bill 25 was the state improvement tax that will allow developers, when they are redeveloping properties for affordable housing, having those properties exempt from the realty transfer tax. This is vitally important, as we see at least when we did our listening tour, a lot of projects in Newcastle County with their old office communities, which are no longer being used, and how do you convert those into housing for the workforce and housing for Delawareans. This will hopefully eliminate the state improvement tax, which is a 2% tax on top of the capital improvements that are done. That was kind of a piggyback off of the Senate Bill 87 work that we did. Still needs to have state and local resources involved to make sure that those units will remain affordable. There's also a huge need in Delaware for the preservation of existing low-income housing tax credit properties. And this bill, I think, will help that process dramatically save resources, because it was kind of like the state would charge the fee and then lend the money to the developer to do the project. And we don't have that many resources, so why don't we try to reduce some of these costs to incentivize the preservation of affordable housing. We're going to skip Senate Bill 23 for a second. Senate Bill 22 was the Delaware Workforce Housing Program. This was modeled after our successful Downtown Development District program, which would provide reimbursements of some of the hard costs that go into affordable housing. The current DDD program has attracted, I think it's used about 35, and I'm looking at Director Carney just in case, $35 to $40 million of state resources, and has leveraged nearly $500 million of private resources. to address our vital downtown communities and core communities. And so this program modeled after the same way would hopefully encourage the development of affordable housing, private resources, and the state coming in with a incentive to make that happen. It's a easy program. It's been well received by the for-profit community and the nonprofit community as far as the DBP program. And hopefully we can get that same buy-in as far as the Delaware Affordable Workforce Housing Program. So again, as the home repair fund, this is sort of like a two-step process. We highlighted the area and highlighted a very successful program. And now we need to work on this next session to get the General Assembly to invest a bit more into that program. So we got it codified. We planted a flag, said this is a successful program, it could work in affordable housing. And now next year, we'll have to get the General Assembly to put more resources into that program. One of our other bills we did was Senate Bill 23, which was accessory dwelling units. This had a lot of stakeholder engagement from our local leagues of governments, our counties, a lot of local towns. This was to allow accessory dwelling units into local jurisdictions codes. We weren't dictating what that accessory dwelling unit code looked like. What we were trying to do was trying to ensure that all our local jurisdictions are part of the issue, are part of the solution, and provide options for accessory dwelling units. And those local jurisdictions would still have to create their own accessory dwelling unit ordinance. We were trying to put in a couple things saying like, don't make it too high of a barrier. Don't allow accessory dwelling units, and then through restrictions, basically disallow accessory dwelling units, because we want to make progress, we want to make steps forward. And if we put too many barriers in front of certain zoning requirements, then we don't get the results of the original zoning regulation in itself. There's also another bill, Senate Bill 274, which in partnership with DelDOT, you can get a credit on your offsite improvements if you are doing affordable housing in those projects. Those rules and regulations will be promulgated by the Department of Transportation, but I think that'll also help in reducing some of the overall costs because we know our communities certainly need affordable housing, especially for our workforce, and we need to have balanced growth and balanced opportunities. And we know we need to reduce costs in some areas and regulatory burdens. And I'm really excited about what this task force will come as far as recommendations and the subcommittee work that we're going to be looking forward ahead of us. And so those were kind of some of the highlights of some of the bills that we did this past year. So just keep those in mind as we embark on doing our work. I guess if there are any questions from the task force members, I'll entertain any. But if not, I think we're good to.
I actually have a quick question. All of the pieces of legislation that you mentioned were passed except for the ADU one, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
We asked that one not to be released from committee because we still needed additional stakeholder engagement and work on it to try to thread that needle, and we respected that process. And so I asked that for that one not to be released from committee. So it's not like it failed, it just didn't get released from committee.
But all the other ones made it through the whole process and.
We did, yeah, and we had a great bill signing ceremony in Lewis, and you know, so it was a lot of fun.
We move on to agenda item number 3. Real quick, I just want to ask our folks online, can you hear me well enough? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, I am gonna screen share some slides. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Caitlin Del Calo. I am the Chief Strategy Advisor for Delaware State Housing Authority. And I am going to share a few housing production policies and best practices. I want to thank the House Majority staff and my colleagues at the OHA for helping compile this information. We are going to post these slides online, and I'm not going to go through every single slide. I'm going to hit the first 4, and then I'm going to turn it to our task force members to report out on their homework. So their homework was to come to this meeting today, ready to share 3 or 4 policies or best practices that they want to see the task force pursue. And we have a flip chart in the room, so when we get to that portion, I'll zoom in so that folks online can see, and we're just going to chart out what everybody's ideas are and note where there is crossover and overlap. Okay, so the first best practice I want to talk about is fair share requirements. These are state mechanisms that enable affordable housing projects to go through in jurisdictions that have less than their quote fair share of affordable housing. So both Massachusetts and Connecticut have a similar approach where if a developer wants to build a project that includes affordable units and they are denied by the locality, if that locality has less than 10% of their housing stock that set aside for income restricted or affordable households, then that developer can appeal to a board. So this only happens when we're talking about a town that has less than 10% of their housing stock that's subsidized. If you're trying to do a project in a town that already has their fair share, they meet that 10% threshold, then this appeal process does not come into play. And this is just an attempt to make sure that affordable housing is happening equitably throughout the state. What's interesting about Connecticut is they, not only do they have this 10% threshold, but they also have a 4-year moratorium option. So if your town, you've got less than 10% of subsidized housing stock, but you're making progress, measurable progress toward increasing your housing stock, you can get a 4-year moratorium from these types of appeals. So that is policy option number 1 that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. Okay, the second option I want to talk about comes from Utah. So back in 2019, they passed SB 34. And what that bill does is it requires municipalities of a certain size and counties to adopt a moderate income housing plan. And as part of this plan, they have to select 3 or more strategies from a menu of options to implement. What I really like about this approach is the menu of options is 23 options long. There's a lot of wiggle room for local governments to pick the strategies that work best for them. So for example, some of the options, I obviously couldn't fit all of them on the screen. But there are things like rezoning for higher densities, particularly where there's urban centers, transit, commercial centers, reducing regulations for accessory dwelling units or ADUs, reducing or waiving impact fees, relaxing parking requirements, especially near transit stops, expanding infrastructure that's needed to support moderate income housing, so the, sewer, water, et cetera. Partnering with nonprofits, community land trusts, partnering with other local governments to apply for federal funds to build housing, applying for technical planning assistance. We know a lot of local governments may not have a full-time planner at their disposal to work on zoning. And then that last option is really the catch-all. That's option number 23, which is any program or strategy that's aimed at serving the needs of households in that jurisdiction that are at or below 80% AMI. So this is just my personal favorite approach because, it requires that everybody in the state work towards building more moderate income housing. But again, those local governments still retain a lot of decision-making as to what those strategies are. Okay, we also have, of course, inclusionary zoning. I think most people are probably pretty familiar with this, but in some cases, these are mandatory programs. In other cases, they're voluntary. But the idea is developers that include affordable housing units in their projects will receive certain incentives. It could be density bonuses, it could be fee waivers, et cetera. And we, of course, have a couple local examples. So Castle County has two inclusionary zoning programs. They have their UPDU, or moderately priced dwelling units, and their workforce housing program. And then, of course, Sussex County has, I call it SCARF, Sussex County Rental Program. In both cases, you know, they're incentivizing the inclusion of affordable rental units in exchange for density bonuses and things like expedited review. And then, again, you know, density bonuses, in and of themselves could be a particular strategy. So, Massachusetts has a really cool, smart growth zoning overlay district, where the state literally will pay municipalities a financial incentive in order to create the zoning overlay that allows higher density in areas where there's transit and access to amenities. So those financial incentive payments can range from $10,000 to $600,000. That would just be for creating the zoning overlay to allow higher density. And then on top of that, they pay bonus payments of $3,000 per unit once a development receives building permits for that project. So I thought that was a pretty interesting way to achieve zoning reform. There are a few more slides. Again, I'm not going to go over them, but just so you can see, you know, there are different approaches to appealing land use decisions, practices regarding housing preservation, permanent supportive housing, and housing trust funds. But at this point, I want to go to my flip chart and hear from our task force members. Bear with me while I get the camera zoomed in.
No.
All right, sound check. Is everybody still hearing me? All right, I'm assuming that's a yes. All right, so I'm going to start charting out everybody's 3 to 4 ideas, and I'm going to try to capture any overlap, any popular themes. And then this will be a great way to have sort of a to-do list as our subcommittees start meeting over the next few months. I don't want to call anybody out, but do we have any volunteers from the task force who want to share out their 3 to 4 ideas? Amy.
So one, you know, and just looking at the document as it related to the number of federal programs that are potentially available that we're not perhaps using at the highest capacity. One idea is just to somehow increase the capacity of local developers to use the tools, really thinking about scholarships, certificates, training that's available to help developers access and manage through the compliance that's necessary to bring some of those resources or more of those resources to Delaware.
All right, so I'm writing increase developer capacity to get federal funding.
Yes,
Does that capture that?
yeah, I guess and use it successfully too.
To get and implement.
Yeah,
So
thank
you
you.
All right.
Another thing that was on my mind, and just talking with some developers is related to bonding authority for affordable housing and what are the limitations there? Can that authority be expanded beyond the state to a jurisdictional level?
And does that accurately capture that?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
thank you. And the senator mentioned this, but, you know, the increasing the HDF is just going to be incredibly important to provide the lending capacity necessary. to be successful.
Okay, so increase funding to the HDF.
Yeah, the baseline funding just hasn't increased in ages and ages and ages.
So I'm just gonna put here increase.
1987.
baseline funding.
Of course you know that.
And HDF is the Housing Development Fund, which of course the SHA administers.
That's right.
Those are your three. Thank you, Amy. All right, Mike.
I'll go. So a couple ideas, and this is actually the Home Builders Association has put out our legislative priorities around these already. I'm happy to share that with the entire group after the meeting. But density is number one. Increases in density in Delaware across the board is simply too low. So providing incentives to increase density, especially in urban and growth areas in the state where we want to see increased density.
So increased density with incentives, especially in urban and growth areas. Great.
Second would be redevelopment incentives, again, focusing in areas where there's already growth or there's already development. Connecticut has a bill that's called Senate Bill 6, which would be worth looking at, but that created a lot of various incentives to convert vacant retail / office into high density housing.
You said that was Connecticut Senate Bill 6.
Correct.
Their reference.
Expedited reviews, the process to get through the land use process is really too long. One of the most expensive costs to deliver housing is simply time and interest carrying costs along the way. We just did a study on a project in Sussex County and the carrying cost was about $30,000 per house. So it's a significant cost. So if we could shorten the time frame to bring housing to market, we can reduce costs.
Putting this as notes. Okay.
And then one more, sorry.
No, don't be. We need this.
Clarifying zoning and land use for more by right. I think one of the challenges that we see is that even in areas where you may be zoned for housing, it's not truly by right. There's a lack of certainty on whether or not you can achieve that. And the process, which can take many years and result in denial, causes developers not to invest. So we need more certainty, more by right zoning, so that developers know that if they invest X dollars, there's going to be a predictable outcome.
Thank you. Anybody else at the table want to share? Rachel?
Sure, next. So I think similar to what Mike just shared, I wanted to share incentivizing affordable housing projects in zones 1 and 2 growth areas. By whatever mechanism the state can control, whether that's through like the DelDOT review process or the DENREC review process, whether it's incentivizing, making sure affordable housing projects are at the front of the line in those processes, whenever one gets put in to be reviewed, that it gets jumped to the front of the line in some way.
Can
So-
I clarify real quick?
Yes.
So you mean, investment level areas 1 and 2, which David is going to expand on in his.
Show you the map.
So that not only are there incentives for, it's not just about affordable housing, it's making sure that housing is close to existing infrastructure, that those two things are paired. Similar to funding for the Housing Trust Fund, but the creation or the Housing Development Fund, the creation of some type of housing trust fund, whether that's the Housing Development Fund looks different or it's a different mechanism, but that there be funding that is ongoing, that has a funding source tied to it, that can grow over the years, that can be predictable for developers, so that they know 4 or 5 years out, there's going to be funding available to help with my project. You know, I think our work with the Delaware Affordable Housing Coalition, we are frequently talking about and going to continue talking about how we think the state's #1 crisis deserves 1% of the budget. So if we had to put a number on it, we'd say 1% of the state budget should be in some type of housing trust fund. And then
I gotta flip the page 1 second.
and then I'll do my third, which is around comp plan processes. And I kind of wish that I heard from David before saying this, but I'll say strengthen the process in general, in terms of what that looks like, but making sure that in terms of the details of what that looks like, I'll hold off, because I have some things to learn here, but ensuring that folks are doing what they need to do at the local level and their comp plans to promote affordable housing.
Awesome, thank you.
Just to piggyback on one of Rachel's ideas, I think this would be where we fund the Delaware workforce. housing,
Right, if you create, yep, more funding,
Which is focused on.
yep, and then the workforce housing program could be funded out, the home repair program could be funded out of that,
Should I put, that up there too, so fund Delaware workforce housing program? Is that what? Okay. DWHP. Got it.
we have a new acronym already.
Yeah. No shortage of housing. Thank you. Anybody else at the table? Jerry?
Good morning, everyone. Jerry Heisler. The reason we're basically in this predicament today, or from my perspective as a developer, is twofold. The entitlement process and the incentives. That's a macro level, but I'm going to give it a little bit more micro level for a little bit. There's a timing issue. It takes a lot of time to go through the process, especially in Newcastle County. And let me give you, for instance, I'm going to pick on the state planning department since we're going to talk today. Please. We go through a plus process. That's the first thing we do. And it takes 3 to 5 months. And I've done 24 pluses, I bet, in my life. Well, I hope I have a lot of pluses, more than 2,000, but in that time, the longest one took 5 months, the shortest one took a couple months. Since I'm an experienced developer, I've never gotten anything out of that process. It's been worthless to me. And why am I spending time and money and delay going through a process that may be mandatory, but nobody really looks at or uses? I'm going through Arusha Village right now, micro home community in Newcastle County, infill, doing affordable housing and part of it, inclusionary housing, doing universal housing for seniors. I'm stopped because I'm going in a circle with traffic review. This is crazy. We want to put affordable housing in, and how are you going to do it in Newcastle County? You're doing infill housing and you get stopped at the traffic light all the time. So entitlements are going to be the key to this. And if you read any academic literature, you read any books, I want to get everybody's name at some point, as I said to the representatives and Caitlin, I want to provide a couple books for people to read. Entitlements are going to be the primary controlling factor for a developer to put up housing. Now, incentive, there's a supply and demand side of this. The supply side is what I get through bonus density or subsidies. They have to be aligned properly for each county. If you're going to take a 800 square foot house and lock a $10,000 impact fee on it for the school district, and it's only 1 bedroom, there's a problem. You're going to do that for a mobile home, there's a problem there. These are misaligned. We need to have subsidies. One of the books I have speaks to subsidies for solving problems for people who are below that 40% level. And unless we do that, we're not going to be able to create any housing security. And I'm going to keep going back to that. Because with housing security, you get health, you get education, you get a family, you get safety, you get all these other prime criteria for living properly. So to me, one of the things I'm scared of, by the way, I got this big, beautiful pamphlet here. It's really thick. I've seen a couple of them, but to me, it's just those 3 issues. The entitlements, the incentives, and incentives are broken down to supply and demand for developer and subsidies or vouchers for the individual. So the problem is the other stuff that I'm reading in here goes with this process, but given that we only have 2 or 3 more meetings, I don't know how we're going to cover all this. And I'm really nervous about that because the entitlement process for each county is different. The entitlement process is controversial, and it would destroy the careers of politicians if you really wanted to solve this problem seriously. So I want to know what the state's willing to do in mandating higher density, getting rid of TISs for truly affordable communities that are lower income, that may be dealing with sex offenders and all the other types of individuals that we have to consider. Thank you.
You said a few things and all right, so I've got entitlements, which when you say entitlement, is that equivalent to by right zoning? Is that?
I don't understand what by right zoning is, because in Newcastle County, I can have a by right zoning, and so will take me 3 years to go through the process. It
When I
means I
say-
just skipped one process, the zoning. So there may be in Sussex and Kent, it may be easier to enact the by right zoning, but in Newcastle County, it's just as hard and expensive. And I have yet to do a subdivision, even on self-storage facility in the last 5 to 10 years that is under $300,000. So when you talk about by right, I'm not sure, you're just getting rid of the zoning, which is a political decision. You're not getting rid of the planning board, you're not getting rid of, by the way, I'm all for putting environmental aspects in the subdivisions. But by right's just skipping one component of the process. So I want to be really careful in thinking that by right's going to happen, because the cost threshold of doing some of these projects is so intensive that you're not going to be able to do it. If we have to put an improvement intersection in for 25 units, it's not a by right then.
Can I answer that? Because I might be able to expand, because that was my comment from earlier on the by right zoning. In Newcastle County, you're right, they have what is called by right, but your densities are 1 point nothing.
Yeah,
an acre.
it's not.
So you don't have any density by right. We need higher densities that are by right. In Sussex County, for example, if you want to do a multifamily project, 9 times out of 10, you're doing a potential rezoning or a conditional use. Even if you have the zoning, you're doing a conditional use in order to get maybe the 12 units per acre, but politically you maybe get 10. That's probably the max. Those numbers are entirely too low. I mean, not even close to where they need to be if we truly want to deliver.
But let's be clear about this, that you may have a by right zoning to do a gross unit density of 10 in Newcastle County, but the net, by the time they suck everything out of it, could be 3. So we want to be really careful what by right means. I don't like that term personally.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're
Yeah,
capturing it accurately. So does that get to what?
entitlements just to me is not density. Entitlements is traffic,
So this.
it's environmental, it's school district issues. It's the whole composite of what entitlement is to build a project. We focus on density, but that's one component of it. Developers have multiple components they have to look at. We have to go through multiple agencies. And you know, when I dealt with the pilot school, I had an ADA issue along the roadway, which took an extra $100,000 to solve. So you end up having, and I'm not against that, I'm just saying there are a lot of complexities in doing this. And the more you go into infill, the more complicated it's going to be, because you are the last person in and you have to fix all the problems in front of you. And that's one of the bigger issues today with planning in infill projects. You have to fix transportation, you have to fix environmental issues. The net result is by right is really a misleading name. I think it's by right, I may have to spend more money.
So the second thing you said was incentives.
Right, you have incentives for a developer,
for development.
and you also have incentives that you have to develop for the person renting the unit through a voucher system
So subsidy.
or subsidies for the ongoing person in there. And that ongoing also has to cover the repair and maintenance of the unit. That is, you may build a project with a nice micro home or an ADU community or whatever else. But to operate that community over time costs money for replacement of the components in the unit, the roof and all, and upgrading for solar, who knows? But somehow we have to get those type of grants into those communities on an ongoing basis. And manufactured housing is a key example. Most of these grants are not eligible for people living, or people don't have eligibility for them in manufactured home communities. Because for quote unquote, they're not on owned land.
Was there a third thing? We've got entitlements and.
No, entitlements and incentives are pretty big things. I mean, you solve that, you solve the whole, to me, you solve the problem.
Anybody else? Have any?
A lot of great ideas, things that, need to happen. Other thing in the workbook that was sent out, talking about how do you get available affordable property? Since COVID, we would buy infill lots out in Castle County and low to moderate income neighborhoods for $20,000. After COVID, I had to spend $60,000. So two of the recommendations in the workbook is to do an inventory of property across the state, publicly owned, privately owned, brownfield, in the brownfield list that DENREC has, and to try to facilitate the movement of those properties for affordable housing.
So we have inventory publicly and privately owned land for affordable housing development.
And then some mechanism to facilitate the process where it becomes available. So in the city of Wellington, along with the land bank, there's a process there that properties are moving towards affordable housing developers. A little bit out in Newcastle County. I don't know about Kent and Sussex, but again, it needs a boost to get to more scale.
Is that Patrick?
Yep.
Anybody else at the table? Senator.
So to kind of go along with, Kevin, we tried, but I don't think we got the right results from one of our concurrent resolutions that we ran in 2023, finding out like what sort of vacant properties the state might have that could be used for that. So we'll certainly get another crack at it, to make sure we ask the right questions there.
Well, I think the other local municipalities also have to be included in that.
Yep.
Process.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, that's great. And I think to go along with what Jerry was saying, we're doing a lot here to maybe like build the initial units or have thoughts on like getting the capital for the initial units. But if we're not also concentrating on the future operations of those units become in jeopardy. And so we need to worry about the operating costs and not just what an HVAC may replace. Like, 'cause I know HVAC units used to cost like $5,000 a unit, and now they're 15, 20,000 a unit. So, and sometimes you don't really have all that budgeted for in your replacement reserve.
In our mobile home parks, manufactured home communities, about 60 to 70% of the units do not work in them. And we did a quick survey. Most of the people have not had their furnaces serviced in 10 years. So this is an astronomical problem for people who live in units that are lower income, who are in workforce housing and mobile home communities, and they probably have some semi-working heating units, but they're probably leaking carbon monoxide. They're probably not functioning properly, and they're not even aware of it. So I think it's really important we develop better programs. Now, I know they have some in the city, but I don't know, again, their manufactured home communities are typically not eligible.
This state has a program with the heater repair and replacement program. And
We were told manufactured homes were not eligible.
Sorry, Amy?
I would just add to, and this is a broad category that could go down many rabbit holes, but I think data is just incredibly important. So when we're talking about manufactured housing, for example, and what they're eligible for, knowing the income levels of the people within a small community, like what Sussex did when they did the study of impacted communities in Sussex County to make those communities eligible for HUD funding, because now they know the data of their residents, that they can't get in deep enough. They can't get deep enough with the census data to be eligible. So I think that that's important too, is to kind of identify where our data gaps are to make sure that we're able to serve residents of communities that are either unincorporated, but we know are low income, just kind of anecdotally, or by serving those residents. But also I think, you know, and I've harped on this in the past related to like market value analysis and other things. Are there data sources that we could be utilizing more effectively, or maybe kind of sharing or creating at a state level that developers could use and therefore save them some costs down the road so they can be more effective and faster and reduce.
Wonderful. I know Deborah Burgos had raised her hand online. So Deborah, if you want to chime in with your three.
Yes, so Deborah Burgos, for those of you that don't know, I am with the Delaware Apartment Association. In our realm, preserving and maintaining existing affordable housing is a critical piece to this puzzle that I sometimes feel gets missed in the desire to build. Building new affordable housing is equally as important, but if we lose the existing stock, we're going to be right back where we are right now, even if we do build more. So things that often increase the supply of rental housing can be things like our rehab codes. If you are doing a large rehabilitation of affordable housing, you're doing more than 50%, you have to bring that property up to the new construction code, which sometimes is just really not feasible. So what ends up happening is that rehab is done and the rent is hiked up to offset the cost. So I know New Jersey has, and I have not gotten a lot of research into it, but they have a special rehab code. There are certain things that should be done, must be done to make sure that housing is safe, but perhaps row homes in, Wilmington, maybe we don't need centralized alarms and sprinklers. Maybe that's not a necessary step. So creating that rehab code. Also encouraging careers in the residential trades is critical. I'm sure the home builders are dealing with the exact same thing that rental properties are. It's really hard to find those in the electrical, plumbing, those trades, the HVAC trades. So because that supply is so limited, it is extremely expensive to hire the people you need to build and maintain housing. And then I think making sure that we're financing for like weatherization and the climate change, again, for existing housing, that can be very expensive to do. And I know our legislature is certainly pushing for some of those climate adaptations. It's important that we're providing credits and assistance for home builders and property owners in making those changes. Most of the credits and assistance that's available is for single family homeowners. So those are my top three.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask if there are any more task force members physically present or online who has an idea that hasn't already been captured in some way. And if not, we will move on to David's presentation on planning.
Representative Velocity.
Wonderful. Representative.
Representative Velocity, if you can unmute.
Another unforced error. Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody. When I have listened to the comments here and thinking about this prior to the meeting, I thought about the complexities and the interaction between the state and the local governments, the county governments as well. And I think that, if that isn't addressed and somehow smoothed over or resolved in some way, I know each county is unique and municipalities have their own kind of, regulations and ordinances and things. But if we don't do that, then, the zoning issues, the density issues, the cost to just purchase the land and also to develop the land, and then you have the regulatory burden on top of that. If without kind of working on those issues and trying to find some coordination between the county and the state. And I know that in prior meetings, Senator Huxtable and I have had meetings with Mr. Edgell, and talked about ways to, move some processes along in Sussex County, and it's difficult. And so unless we have that coordination, I'm wondering what sort of success we can have, because the state can certainly pass laws to make things easier from our standpoint. But if we don't coordinate this with the counties and the municipalities, then I think we're probably gonna bog down. And the last part I want to mention is the coordination with DelDOT. In Sussex County here, especially in eastern Sussex, we have such a problem with development, and then the lag that good people at DelDOT are just trying to play catch up all the time. So I'm wondering if there is some sort of better way to coordinate that so that the citizens that are here now are not overburdened for this, preparing for the citizens who are yet to come. And I think that those are all issues that may be worthy of consideration for this task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I've added your items to our list, and we do have representation from DelDOT on our Regulatory and Permitting Subcommittee, which will be chaired by David. So definitely want to welcome everybody to attend those meetings once they get scheduled. Okay, Karen?
I'll just echo again exactly what Jeff just said. I think there needs to be a streamlined process for all the different for development. Sorry for this terrible cold that I have. And I think we need to look at keep it living at the macro levels. We need more funding, and we need better streamlined processes, and we need a fair share in terms of the towns all providing a fair share to what is equal to not maybe more than 10%, right? What's the percentage of low income and moderate income families in our state? So that's enough said. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And our staff at DSHA, we have done saturation analyses of the municipalities in Delaware. And there are municipalities that are carrying more than their fair share. So for example, Laurel has, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 40% of their housing stock is subsidized in some way. But then you have places like along the beaches, your Ardens, that have 0% of their housing stock that are subsidized. So we do have that data that we can look at and disseminate as we go through our subcommittees. All right, at this point, I am going to hand it over to David, and I will get the slides up for you.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. While Caitlin's getting the slides up, I'll just, for everybody introduce myself and what I'm presenting. David Edgell, Director of the Office of State Planning Coordination. Caitlin asked me to present the overview of sort of how local government planning works in the state of Delaware vis-a-vis the state review and certification process. And what I've got in my slides is parts of a course that we teach through the University of Delaware to the municipality. We call it Planning 101. Taken a 3-hour course and transferred it into a 10 to 15 minute presentation. So there's a lot of things I will leave out because you're not all municipalities, but I'm going to hope to kind of cover the main point to show you how that relationship works between the state and local governments vis-a-vis planning. So our Office of State Planning Coordination, you'll see it. I've got slides on all this stuff in a minute, but as an overview, we do work through the Cabinet Committee on State Planning Coordination to develop our strategy for state policies and spending, which is sort of our state growth strategy and our state investment strategy related to land use. And that includes the results of all the local government comprehensive plans, of which there are 57 municipalities and 3 counties for a total of 60. We coordinate the review of those local government plans through the preliminary land use service process. And at the end of that process, forward those plans and a report to the governor for certification. And that Cabinet Committee on State Planning Issues that I mentioned is very involved in the process in the county plans, which are different and bigger. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the local government plans, our office manages that review onto the governor. And the last little bullet point there, our office is designed to provide technical assistance to the local governments as they go through that process. Again, there are 60 local governments. Our 3 counties are, very different, larger jurisdictions, more regional plans, larger planning staffs. Local governments range from and Wilmington, of course, with about 75,000 people, down to Hartley, which has, I think, about maybe 50 now. So there's a pretty wide range of expertise in those local governments, and we help them with data and information. We don't write their plans for them, but we help them through that process as much as we can. So with that, next slide, please, Caitlin. This is, you know, a slide from the Cabinet Committee's annual report, which will be published later this week, but we haven't had the same one in their previous reports. But this shows the state government's role in a variety of sort of roads, police, paramedic funding, school funding. These are things that are sort of big ticket items on the state's budget calendar. I know that, you know, senators certainly know, representatives know those things come up every year. But what's interesting about Delaware and why the state's involved and interested in land use planning of the local jurisdictions is these are elements that are often funded by local governments in other states. And because Delaware has a very generalist General Assembly, and because we are a state of just about 1 million people now, we're very small, we only have 3 counties, it makes a lot of sense to do these things at the state level and fund these things at the state level rather than require 60 local governments to do parts of them. So this is a very efficient process, but it does require us to work very closely with our local government partners as they're planning their land use. Our agencies need to be aware of that so they can plan the infrastructure and services that go along with that. So that's the explanation of why the state planning system has been put in place. And if you go to the next slide, please, Caitlin. Just to touch on the state strategies that our office sort of manages that process for the Cabinet Committee on State Planning Issues. This is updated every 5 years. And again, we have 60 local governments. Each one of those local governments is required to do their comprehensive plan. We take those plans and their growth areas and the data, and we combine it with the data from the various state agencies, DNREC, DelDOT, housing, you know, others. And we work through a process where we sort of produce this composite map, which, you know, long story short, the red and the orange areas are, we call them level 1 and 2. It's been mentioned a couple of times here today. Those are our sort of urban areas, our towns, our cities, and our sort of most developed areas around the towns and in the counties. We have level 3, which is yellow, which really is sort of the emerging growth area. You can sort of think about that as suburbia or sort of the next level of growth and development that's out there. And the white areas are level 4, and those are rural areas where we expect, you know, agriculture and natural resources and rural land uses. There's a whole lot of gray on there, and the gray represents lands that are already protected and preserved in some way through conservation easements, agricultural preservation easements, environmental restrictions. The sort of coast is gray because there are tidal wetlands in that area, and you cannot build upon a tidal wetland. So that's the general snapshot, and we use this at the state level as we're doing capital budgeting and reviewing plans, and our local government partners, you know, use it as they're developing their comprehensive plans, and we work together, you know, through that process. So go to the next slide, please. So here's the sort of process for the local governments that we sort of run that. So I took all that, and Jerry, you're right, you know, development projects like subdivisions do go through PLUS. I don't have that slide because I cut a lot of stuff out, but the comprehensive plans go through the process every 10 years. We review it, so all our state agencies have a chance to review the plans based on their areas of expertise. And then the plans are updated by the local governments as necessary. Those plans are then they adopt their plans, and then our office writes a report about the compliance with the state statutes and any changes that went through PLUS, and then it goes to the governor for certification. The governor's certification of the plan means that the plan meets all state statutes, and that the state's aware of local government's intentions and supports the local government as they implement that plan over the course of in 10-year period. It doesn't mean, however, that the local government puts something in the plan that they'd like to have a new, road or sports stadium or some other thing that the state government is going to actually build that thing, but we'll work with the town as they look towards that goal. So go to the next slide. So the requirements in Delaware Code, as I mentioned, all local governments have to do these plans. In Title 22 is for the municipalities, and we've got a slide in a minute. There's a difference between the small towns under 2,000 population and the larger towns that are over 2,000 population towns and cities. And interestingly, the text and maps in the municipal plans have the force of law. So if they say something in their plan, it's kind of they're tied to doing it. County plans completely different in that they come from a different section of Delaware Code, written at a different time. It's in Title IX, it's called the Quality of Life Act. It's got a lot of, additional language and it's more prescriptive in a lot of ways, even in the housing section, sort of things they have to cover. So they're a little bit different, but the important part, another important part about this is really the map series in the counties has the force of law. The text is really policy guidance and that type of thing. So go to the next slide. This is a look at what all local governments have to do, whether they're over or under 2,000 population. And again, they every 10 years, they have a public process by which they have a planning commission and they hold meetings and workshops and charrettes and talk about all these different elements in their community. And they talk about population housing growth, annexation, character, land use, infrastructure. Importantly, they have to coordinate with the state, the county, and other municipalities around them and intergovernmental coordination. And we also kind of work on the municipal boundary at that same time. So on the next slide is the sort of additional things. If you're over 2,000, this is where affordable housing sort of comes in as an official, element that they have to have in their comprehensive plan. But as you see, it kind of talks about policy statements, goals, and planning components, which they should do a little deeper dive into these topics and have a little more detailed, discussion, and often, recommendations and action items after the plan to actually follow up on these things. And I will say that having done this for a few years and seen a lot of these plans, it's very common for the smaller municipalities to have most of these elements in the plan as well. Because, you could do a bare bones plan if you're Hartley, but Hartley does tend to have things like environmental features and roads and other issues, and they sort of tend to kind of include many of these things in their plans, no matter what. And again, if you want to know more, there's a link in this presentation on our website. There's a checklist, and we have not just the checklist of what's in there, but we actually have some written guidance about what our agencies, our office and agencies are expecting in terms of what goes into those elements. So that's the other 2.5 hours of this. So I think, and this is kind of focused on municipal plans. We got a lot more of those. The municipalities in a lot of ways are, our most developed areas. They're our oldest communities. They tend to be higher density just by nature of when they were developed. And they certainly are great places for any kind of housing and affordable housing for sure. But the comprehensive plan, really the way a municipality uses the plan and should be using the plan is really to direct sort of the other activities that municipality may do related to growth and development and the use of land. And you see the sort of circle around there. We've got sort of code enforcement and capital improvements programming. The plan might identify the need for a certain capital improvement, and then that might be something that leads to a further study and then an actual, investment. You touch on community design, growth and annexation. A lot of our municipal governments are growing by annexation and they're adding additional land. And so that gets talked about in the plan. Certainly environmental protection, historic preservation, community development. You see at the very top of the list there is the subdivision, zoning and subdivision or land use codes. That is a really important, this is a really important point I want to dwell on for a moment. So what the statutes say is that the comprehensive plan guides the local government's land use ordinances and zoning. And oftentimes it's a zoning ordinance and a subdivision ordinance or a unified development code, if you will, where all that's kind of plays together. The local governments are required to, within 18 months of adopting their plan, to comprehensive rezone, to make those elements sort of match. So if the plan says they want to have housing in an area and they've got it zoned industrial, they have to change it to residential within that 18-month period. I want to point out a couple things. Number one, our review at the state planning office and the state level ends with the certification of the plan by the governor. So that requirement for that 18 months trigger for them to change their zoning and make it match. The state doesn't really have any authority to check on the towns to see if they've done that. If the towns and counties don't do that, then they're subject to legal action or some other action from property owners and developers maybe, but we don't really have an enforcement capacity to do that. And I will say that most of them, do something to make sure that they match things up. And sometimes that takes longer than 18 months. I know in Newcastle County in particular, they've been taking longer because they found that to be a process that needed more engagement as they went through it, but they do take it very seriously and do that. The second thing is, and I think, a number of speakers today have talked about, density and by right and transparency and predictability. I don't want to, there are certainly exceptions to this in the local governments, but I think it's fair to say that it's very common for the, local government plans to, when doing the land use, to talk about residential use in some of their areas and then to zone it with what we call a base zoning. So that's your that's your 1.0 whatever unit per acre, zoning, which is a base. And that technically complies with that comprehensive plan. They may have a goal for housing and diverse housing types, but they tend to handle that. And this is a legacy of, 60 or 80 years of doing zoning. This is kind of the practice is they handle that through, well, if the developer's got a proposal to make a higher density, we will certainly consider it as a conditional use or a rezoning or some other process. And then that sort of kicks off whatever that local government has in their procedure for the public hearings and the notice and the chance for residents to come out and have their say in that. So while the comprehensive plan and the comprehensive rezoning are in the code, I'm just explaining that tends to be the result of that process and why kind of got some of
You're saying it's not connected, the comprehensive plan and the zoning.
So the comprehensive plan and the zoning are connected in an official legal way so that they do comply.
Not planning.
But if the again, and part of, I was listening to what everybody was saying, part of this is kind of going the rest of the way and getting to the point where we can implement some of these housing goals that we articulate in the comprehensive plans, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I think that it's it's kind of my observation that not many of the municipalities have had the technical resources, the time, the interest at their local level to go that next step and make it so that these things are by right or zoned appropriately, so that there's things. There's certainly a lot of work to be done, and I'm preempting my next slides, but I will go. I can't remember what the next slide is. Yeah, so here we go. Here's a couple of ones. I'm just gonna I just have 3 slides of examples of the housing elements. We went through, we've been working with our partners at the SHA for a year and a half at least, starting with, Eugene Young and his team and Caitlin and a lot of others. And, a year and a half ago, we kind of had this question, what's in these we see these plans over the course of a 10-year period, and there's, years between when we see them. So we read them all again, and we looked at all the plans. And I think the good news for all of us is that the plans generally, especially the most recent ones, are very good in terms of identifying the challenges, containing the data, which DSHA has a lot of credit goes to the team at DSHA for providing that through the comprehensive planning process, making sure each town or county understands the data behind what the housing challenges are. And these plans really have good ideas in them and good recommendations in them. And here's one in Newark where they've got some tables of comparing their ownership, and they've got an example of a redevelopment project. And if you go to the next slide, I think there's one from another, there's one from Dover, and they talk about again, tables of data, understanding Dover's one of the ones that's doesn't have 10%, but it's got, I think, 9% of their housing is stuff there right there. But they're pretty aware of where they are. And strategy 4 there is pretty interesting because that's specific to our downtown development district program, which was mentioned here earlier by Senator Huxtable, I believe. Incredibly successful program. And I think it points out, and this really only applies in the downtown area, but it's an excellent example of a program where we've been able, where the state and local governments have partnered on a desired outcome, which is redevelopment of downtowns, and worked hard together to provide incentives both the state side and the local side. And even to the extent that, I think Jerry or somebody mentioned, these projects are hard in a redevelopment context, very challenging. And we even have a community development coach that we employ to help investors figure out what the steps are gonna be to make these projects a reality, trying to, you know, we've got the city working, we've got the state agencies working, we've got a sort of economic development coach working with investors, trying to make it all come together, and it's been incredibly successful. So, again, another idea for the board there, Caitlin, but that's, you know, kind of the flavor of things. So the next one is just another picture from another town that probably has, you know, again, all of them have lofty goals. So again, good news is the information, you know, each town or county has definitely through their planning process, identified the issues, come up with ideas, work with their communities to acknowledge those ideas. I think what's been missing, or maybe not as much as we would have hoped, is the actual implementation of those ideas on the ground. And hopefully this task force comes up with some things that will help with that. And it's got to be, I believe it's got to be a partnership with our local government partners to really make it a reality, because, you know, the local governments, the municipalities, some counties, you know, they get a little frustrated sometimes and say, well, we don't own the land and we're not housing developers. We can't build this housing. But you know, through their, maybe not their comp plan, but their zoning, they can certainly stop it or slow. You know, so how do we make that, you know, that match to get to our goal? So go to the next slide. I'll wrap it up here real soon. I'm just this, yeah, I think this is my last slide, and basically just talks about you know, local governments to you know, they have to do this comprehensive rezoning that I mentioned, and I did mention, and hopefully I'm not upsetting any local governments by saying that they, you know, they comply with the law, but maybe they haven't gone far enough to meet their goals that they espouse in the plan. They send us an annual report each year, and I took all the slides out about this because of time, but we did get them to answer a question about their housing implementation last summer, this past summer, the summer before. So there's a lot of local governments that are trying different programs and incentives and various things, and some have had some success. So there's a, you know, that's not like none of them are doing anything. There's a lot of good examples out there that we can draw from and maybe build from. And then the last part of this is local governments are required to review these plans every 5 years, and that can be as simple as going to a public meeting and reviewing the plan and then acknowledging that the plan is still good and we're going to keep going for another 5 years. That doesn't always happen. We've had a lot of times local governments do that and they decide to amend their plan, change one or two things. We've even had towns that looked at it every 5 years and said that we don't like this plan, we're gonna do a whole new plan. And usually after mayor changes or something, but I mean, it does happen. But bottom line is every 10 years, they get a full update cycle. The counties are on the same 10-year update cycle. And because of the way things have gone, we're on, you know, every year we review a few of them. They're not all due the same year, thankfully, for everybody. But right now we're on kind of a lull where a lot of them have been certified here in the last few years, and it will be probably 27, 28, 29 when we'll start to see the next round of these plans come up for review again. I believe that's my last slide. I hope I kept to the 15 minutes, but I'll answer any questions. Yes.
So on the, talk a little bit about the levels 1, 2, 3, 4, a little bit more. So level 1 and 2 has always been sort of identified as, you know, predominant growth area where we want to have growth. But there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect in those levels when you compare them to some of the county plans, like Kent County as an example. They have a defined growth zone in the state. There's areas of level 3 and 4 that are in there. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. And one concern is that we've already talked about it here where we said, well, in levels 1 and 2, but that doesn't always jive with the county or local plans. And how can we better correlate those two things?
So a couple things. One thing I didn't mention is we're in, you know, the state strategies is updated every 5 years. 2025 is the year it gets updated. We've already started analyzing the data for that 5-year update. So that update will pick up plans that have been certified since 2020. Yeah, so number one, those areas may change based on just, you know, other plans have been you know, adopted. The other thing is, you know, we've got the analysis. We have new land use, land cover data for the statewide GIS system. We're taking a deep dive into, you know, what land's available in each level to help us identify that, and we're comparing it to the population growth and the housing growth that we're expecting. So we're kind of working on that question. Is there enough in level 1 and 2? Do we need some more level 3? Do we, how does that work? And I will say that every time we've done the strategies, since it started, there have been changes in that to add areas or change areas based on the comprehensive plans. And if we find out, with input from this process, because that's part of, we're going to have the results of this task force in March of next year, and our state strategies are due in July. We'll have some chance to kind of have some interplay. Do we need some more, level 1 and 2 in certain areas? And it's got to be based on data, and analysis, but we can sort of check that and make sure because we don't want to see, and what we haven't had so far, we don't want to see, things defined so tightly that there is, not enough room for the real estate market to work and have choices and options on which parcels and where to go to. And I say that, the other side of that challenge though becomes, and we've sort of talked about DelDOT a lot today, and they're a perfect example of, if DelDOT's going to be planning for roads and infrastructure in areas, they need to know where those areas are so they can get ahead of that, so that developers like your clients and Jerry, you don't come into an area, it's like nothing is planned. I think you wrote down your thing, transportation improvement districts. That's kind of a new thing, and that's not to elongate this, but that's where areas where DelDOT has worked with local governments through the comprehensive plans to identify areas where growth is going to occur, get ahead of those improvements, come up with a capital transportation program just for that area. Those are perfect areas for what we're talking about here in terms of making it quicker and easier. You kind of, short version is you skip the whole TIS process in those areas and you pay a fee that's calculated based on the trips and the improvements for that particular area. So those are, again, excellent examples that we can sort of leverage for the next state strategies and for hopefully for the work of this group.
So one of the things that bothers me is that we're concentrating affordable housing in the certain level areas and excluding it from other areas. Same problem zoning has with affordable housing. We need to get DENREC as part of this conversation to develop a private authority, not a private, a public authority to do community septic systems, and where they would manage them, and thereby the whole state would be open for affordable housing rather than certain confined areas that may not have available land or it's contaminated. And I think one of the things that really bothers me now is we're seeing the same principles apply for exclusionary housing that existed for decades in zoning codes is now being used by people saying, oh, we don't allow community septic systems. And many of them have failed, and I agree with that. But if we had a private authority or a public authority managing those, we would have a different opportunity for affordable housing in the state.
Jerry, I'll add that to our chart. We only have 11 minutes left. So we're gonna have to stay a little bit late. I think future first meetings will probably schedule 2 hours so that we can make it through everything. But at this point, I'm gonna turn it over to Rep. Johnson to announce our subcommittee membership. So I am gonna pull up slides for that.
All right, wonderful. And I will do my best to get through this, so that we can try and get some of our time back. How about that? So I won't read absolutely everything, to you all. I'll provide you just with some general, overview. Okay, where are you? Okay. So, we're all aware that there are 5 subcommittees. Regulatory and permitting, and David Edgell is the chair. Finance and development, and Amy Walls is the chair. Construction, and Mike Ryman is the chair. Manufactured housing, Jerry Heisler is the chair. And the community focus group, Rachel Stucker is the chair. So that's information that people need to know, and you'll also be able to find all of this information online. Since I'm going through it fairly quickly, you all here actually have the pages. Everyone else out there in Zoom world, please go online to see the full list of membership. What is really striking to me and to the individuals here is this. This is what I want you all to know. Regulatory and Permitting Subcommittee. 14 individuals volunteered. There were only 8 slots. Finance and Development, 22 people volunteered. There were only 8 slots. Construction, 11 people volunteered. There were only 8 spots. Manufactured Housing, 5 people volunteered. 1 was placed in another subcommittee, and we have 2 slots open in that subcommittee. And then finally, we have the Community Focus Group, and there were 20 volunteers for 8 slots. So I sat here really quickly. I didn't expect anyone to do the math, but I just pulled out my calculator or my phone. Who has a calculator anymore? Listen, 72 people volunteered to be a part of this task force. 72 people for only 40 slots. That gives us all an indication of how very important this matter is to our state. 72 people for 40 slots. And to that I say, I know it comes to, a little disappointing for those individuals who were not selected to be a task force member. But what I want you to know, again, are the sheer numbers of people who volunteered and all of the resumes and all of the other supporting documents, because people were serious about this. I thought I was reading someone's thesis. You all made it extremely difficult for us, and I'm thankful for that because it shows your commitment to this problem. So again, thank you all. And for the folks out there in Zoom land, thank you for participating as well. And then for the people here who are not task force members, by showing up, being here, you're letting everyone know how important it is. So thank you. We just needed to get that out into the universe quickly for everyone, and to just kind of provide folks with the frame of reference and understanding 72 people volunteered for 40 slots and how amazing it is and how very challenging it was at the same time. So hopefully I've given us some time back.
Yes, thank you, Representative. So our last agenda item is public comment. We are going to give everybody who signed up 2 minutes to speak. So first, I'm going to do the folks who signed up who are in person. But real quick, I need to get my timer up so that we're being fair. Okay, so our first person who signed up for public comment is Joseph Walls. Mr. Walls, if you could sit at the end of the table near the speaker. You may have to, is it blinking green?
It's blinking orange and green. I don't know what that
Okay,
means.
we need a green one in front of him.
Green ones. This is, I think this one's just green. Here we go.
All right, and I'm gonna hit start now, sir.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Joseph Walls. I'm the CEO of Veteran Services and primarily advocate for incarcerated veterans and getting them housing and programming when they come out of prison. We run into some problems. One of them in relation to what you were talking about with the accessory dwelling units. The town of Smyrna, when you talk about restrictions, they won't allow manufactured housing, and they won't allow the primary residence to be rented. So that elderly people that have a house that they raised their family in, they no longer need a big house. They can't put something in their backyard that they can live in while they rent out the primary residence. So that's restricting a lot of houses right there. The problems with the Delaware State Housing Authority is there's a lot of money available. There's still a lot of money available, but it's not being allocated because they're primarily focusing on large developers. In order to spend $100,000 or $300,000 for this zoning, you have to probably have a couple million in play. So that eliminates people like me that want to go around and get these small 3, 4, 5 unit buildings and convert them into home ownership. We're not allowed to do that. Under the MIF program, you had to have at least 5 units. Under the low income housing tax credit, they want you to have at least 5 units. This is really eliminating small developers and small projects. We can't be forcing these people into 100-unit housing projects, 500-unit housing projects. They deserve small, local, family units.
Thank you, Mr. Wall.
Thank
That was
you.
2 minutes. Okay, next up, we have Matt, Great Outdoor Cottages. Okay, I couldn't tell if that was a yes or a no. All right, next we have Lisa Rice. Lisa, you can set up at the table there. And your time starts now.
Hello, I am Lisa Rice, a disabled mom to a developmentally disabled child. I'm one generation from being an immigrant. I think a lot of us are. And I experienced homelessness as a young adult. My family has been at zero earned income for 3 years. We lived off of our own resources since then, and our window is closing. Therefore, as you consider the potential solutions, please remember my face when you see opportunities for low income, people facing homelessness. My son is facing a nursing home or institution. Remember me. Disabled Delawareans have no choice but to live at low income. Whether you were born that way or you became disabled serving our country, we have no choice in the matter, and we've been waiting for housing since 1773. I pray that this task force uses the power that you have. Thank you all for being here and being a part of the task force and a part of the solution for families like mine.
All right, that is everybody in person who signed up to speak. Real quick, was there anybody else? Nope, okay. All right, we will now go with the folks online. If everybody could raise their hand. Kiki, could you help me identify who's got their hand raised? Okay. All right, so our next speaker will be. I'm screen sharing, so I don't know who. It's Char, okay, so our next speaker is gonna be Char. All right, I'm gonna start your time.
Good afternoon, Char Petty-Banda, Newcastle County Land Use. I just wanted to say that I think it would have been very helpful to have the counties represented on the task force, but I do appreciate the invitation to the subcommittee, and we're very happy to add our perspective. I also just wanted to let everyone know that the county recently adopted 2 new ordinances. One is on redevelopment and to allow more density in our commercial corridors. There's also moderately priced dwelling unit requirements for projects like that. And it also includes an office to multifamily conversion option. And we are exploring to see how to make those projects work in Newcastle County. And we also expanded our accessory dwelling unit eligibility. So we're hoping that our homeowners will also take advantage to build more ADUs in the county to increase our affordable housing stock. So happy to serve on the committee, but I do think that our perspective from land use from all the counties is being left out on the main task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Char. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Ed Kutzait. Your time starts now. Ed, could you unmute yourself?
Thank you very much. I would just like to point out that one of my interests is housing for persons with disabilities. Nationwide, we know that between 30 and 40% of the persons who are homeless are persons with a disability of some kind. This is a growing problem, and it is something which a state has to attack and solve. Plus, we have to keep in mind the saying that we have all heard, I'm sure, housing is healthcare. Poor housing drives up healthcare costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kutzait. Okay, we're not seeing any other raised hands. We'll give it one more moment for folks to decide whether they want to provide public comment. And you can also submit written comments to housing.taskforce@delaware.gov. Any written comments received in the next 48 hours will be appended to the meeting minutes for this meeting. Okay, it looks like there's no more public comments. I will turn it back over to our co-chairs to adjourn the meeting.
All right. Wow. Another really good meeting. And as Caitlin shared, perhaps we need to extend our time a little bit, but all in all, it's 12:03. So we didn't go over too much, but boy, we could have talked a whole lot more. As I stated when I went through the subcommittee membership, I was talking about the total number of folks who volunteered to be a part of it. And then my co-chair whispers to me, there's 70 people online. And I'm like, what? 70? Again, just wow. And so this is an odd view, but to people out there online, thank you all for being here. Subcommittee members who are in Zoom land, thank you for being here. And again, for everyone else, for everyone, because again, it shows our commitment. And we are here volunteering our time for our state, for the greater good of Delawareans. And our end result, and it's not going to be easy, is chipping away at this problem. Plain and simple. It did not create itself overnight. It won't go away because we come up with phenomenal recommendations, right? It's not going to happen that quickly. But if we stay committed, we can do this together for the greater good of our state. Thank you all again for being here. If there are any additional closing comments from my co-chairs.
I think you said it well.
We're good. All right. So then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all again.
Thank you.